Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. HeirofCarthage here, and this is some classic vanilla Rome 2 1v1 action, and this one comes to us courtesy of Baby Killer, and he is going to provide us with a few replays, and I'll try and spread those out over the next little while, but appreciate them being sent over. I'm excited about these. I love sub-commanders. It's an awesome game mode, and it requires a certain skill with army picking and coordinating teams, and then individual talent. But a 1v1 is kind of a whole different ball game, especially in vanilla Rome Total War. It's like a different ability that goes into picking armies, thinking about what your opponent might do, picking the appropriate army to try and give yourself a chance, and then microing that army better than your opponent typically is going to be important. Now, unless you've just picked something that just totally outclasses the other person, of course. And usually when you have two skilled players involved, that's not usually the case in terms of just, picking something that's going to completely decimate your opponent. Now, it does happen. Now, this matchup happens to be Armenia versus Parthia. And this is an interesting matchup. Both of these are Eastern powerhouses of a sort, in the sense that they can both cataphract really well, and they can both skirmish pretty well. I would say Parthia is probably the better skirmisher of the two, whereas I think Armenia has access to some pretty decent axemen if you decide to bring an infantry line. And let's take a look at some of the units on the battlefield. We can see 4 units of noble horse archers from the Parthians. Now, thing to note here, these noble horse archers have pretty darn good melee stats, and they have 90 armor. There are 3 armored horse archers on the side of Armenia. These are only 40 armor, but they do still have decent melee stats whenever they go into a battle late. But obviously the noble horse archers kind of in a league of their own. There's 3 Eastern slingers. The infantry for Armenia is just going to be a mix of extremely cheap infantry, which is just kind of more for show and charge absorption, whereas the damage is intended to be done with the skirmishers and the cavalry. There are 2 royal cataphracts and 4 Easterns. Now, these are going to be some very deadly cavalry here. They are opposed in the cavalry department by those 4 aforementioned noble horse archers. And then there's going to be 4 camel cataphracts. Camel cataphracts, very dangerous units as well. They do have the ability to scare horses, which means that if a horse unit is kind of suffering from low morale, the camels might cause that to tilt over the edge and rout because of that scare effect. Parthia is also rocking 3 Eastern slingers and a mix of hillmen and Eastern infantry. So we're going to see how this one plays out. There's been a pretty ferocious skirmish out here on the left flank of Armenia, and it looks like we have some units being moved, and this Eastern slinger has an attack order that has brought it, or a movement order, one of the two, way too far out ahead of its lines, and the royal cataphract here is going to make extremely short work of these slingers. Now that is being countered by a camel cataphract and a hillman. Hillmen do have javelins. Javelins are very effective against cavalry in vanilla Rome Total War, or Rome 2 Total War. So we're going to see some big damage there, but javelins again from the friendly hillmen going into the camel cataphracts. So you're going to see Parthia really probably not get the better of this engagement. They're going to lose the slinger. Their hillmen are going to get crunched by royal cataphracts, and then their own cataphracts are getting countercharged. We had a vicious charge through the middle in multiple spots, with enemy cataphracts crashing into infantry. You can see that here. And when it happens, it'll get nearly 100 kills or more on the charge because these units are so heavy and the infantry units are so light. And so this just kind of turns into complete pandemonium, to be honest. You'll see a charge here in the mercenary Sarmatian horse archers. Parthia had a couple of those on the other flank. And at this point, Parthia is in trouble. This melee started quickly. They did not get a particular advantage from their skirmishers, and so there was a big melee cavalry advantage, and I say melee, really shock cavalry advantage for Armenia. And Armenia is really making that felt at the moment, and Parthia has desperately got to do something about it if they want to turn the battle around. But personally, I feel like Armenia kind of took the lead here. Here comes those noble horse archers. They're going to get tangled up with Eastern cataphracts. Not really where they want to be in terms of a melee, unless it has to be at the very end. But look at this, bypassing some of those other units, going to go for the kill here on the Eastern slingers. It's going to be a good call, but look at this, royal cataphracts combining with Eastern. They are beating the camel cataphracts. Parthia's capability to wage a melee fight is quickly being disrupted, and their skirmishers are paying a huge price in the process. So I just don't know if they can pull themselves out of this one. I like the pick of the Noble Horse Archers. It gives an interesting touch to Parthia. Parthia had a pretty big bow horse advantage, and I feel like they got into the melee a little bit early, and they needed to kind of push that bow horse advantage a little bit longer. But I mean, props to Armenia here for moving up, getting squared up in the fight, and taking the fight to Parthia, because it's going to result here in a clear victory for Armenia. So it's an interesting challenge when you play these two factions, usually because they depend on a lot of skirmishers and cavalry. The battle can be very prolonged sometimes and very drawn out whenever there's enough skirmishing going on. Other times, if it starts, it can start and end quickly because the infantry is very squishy compared to the cavalry. And when these cataphracts get to work, there's typically a lot of kills to be had and a lot of carnage if the other team just gets caught in a bad position. And I think that's kind of what happened here for Parthia. They got caught in a bad position with that slinger, and it just started going downhill from there. But, you know, again, these are tough factions to fight against. They're actually, in my opinion, tough factions to play as. It requires a great deal of skill to use these Eastern factions properly, but when you do, it's a thing of beauty, kind of an art, where you do all that skirmishing and the charging. And so I think it's neat to see these two factions. Thank you to both players. It was a good time. Again, you can see these camel cataphracts. This one right here was just crushing Armenian infantry on the charge. That's where it got most of those kills from. But just kind of an overwhelming capability here. You only had 4 cataphracts to the 5 of Armenia, and it just didn't work out well in the end. The Noble Horse Archers are tough units, but it's hard for them to counter these cataphracts once they get on a roll. So again, an interesting game here. Hope you all enjoyed this one. Appreciate Baby Killer sending it over. I'll be back soon with some more action in Total War Rome 2, and I will see you then.